we're continuing with pop art. We talked a little bit about Rauschenberg. I want to show you, and I'm going to look at the images somewhat briefly and not say too much about Jasper Johns' work because audio does seem to be working now. So we will go to some segments of the film called, and my voice is so much sorry about that. We're going to go to and look at some segments from a film called Painter's Painting. And you get to hear Johns talk about this, kind of put work into a little more context. This is a work from a series of paintings that he did in the mid-50s where he was really interested in signs and creating, and this is oftentimes the way that work is talked about, is that he creates these paintings using forms like the American flag or patterns that are like targets. These really kind of instantly recognizable forms that have a lot of meaning. And if you think about something like a flag in its simplest sense, it's red and white and blue. It's a graphic pattern basically. White stars, blue square, red and white lines and so on. It's really abstract in that sense. However, it's really embedded with meaning and certainly a lot of deep meaning, and that meaning can change and kind of shift around as well. And I think one of the reasons I mentioned that is it's important to think of Johns' work in the context of the mid-1950s. So he creates this work here, and I'm not going to talk about the media because it's something he talks about in the interview, and we can come back and talk about it afterwards. The other thing that's important to also keep in mind about this work, and it's really difficult to see in reproduction, is he starts it. I have to talk about the media. I didn't want to, but I realized that I can't get away from it. That's not remote. He starts it in an enamel paint, which takes a long time to dry. Then he switched to encaustic, which is a beeswax base, so it's translucent. And embedded in the encaustic, you can maybe kind of see little references to it, are torn up pieces of magazines and newspapers. So again, print media references, basically to this idea of the news or information that's being presented. And it's literally kind of embedded in that material, in this material, the encaustic itself. And it's not very noticeable when you first look at the image. And again, you kind of have to look at the actual painting to see it. But as you're standing there looking at it, then you realize that there's all this other information or all these other things which are embedded in the image itself. So the longer you look at it, the more you see. So this is the first work that he does of the 5 series. He also begins, he kind of moves in the direction of this image repeating. Also keep in mind that an image of the flag, especially in the 1950s, and we'll talk about that a little bit too, it has a lot of power. It's really significant. It's something that you see repeatedly, right? The flag is flown in various places. You see it in Pledge of Allegiance. It's a student, you see it regularly and so on. So there's the idea of the flag too is it's kind of infinitely repeatable as well. And in some ways that's at odds with this being a work of art, which is original, right? Is this original work of art, isn't it? He's bringing up some of these questions that, the Dada certainly brought up earlier in the century as well. Now it's also important to think of or keep in mind that Johns is beginning to do this work, the 5 series in particular, during the 1950s, and when there's something happening culturally that's known as the Red Scare. And I'm curious, when I say Red Scare, does that have any relevance to you? Does that mean anything? Yes.
It was like a movement in the United States where everybody was terrified of Russians.
Yeah, and not so much Russians, but the Soviet Union, right? And they're terrified of the Soviet Union. Why are they terrified of the Soviet Union? Right, of communism, right? There's this fear that communism was going to overrun, was going to infiltrate America, would literally overrun, America itself. And what else is behind that fear?
McCarthyism.
Well, McCarthyism is certainly part of it. Let's talk about that. What's the ultimate fear? It's connected to the Cold War is this dynamic. Cold War means that you're not in an active engagement, although technically the Korean War and the Vietnam War are hot wars and they're part of the Cold War era. What's the ultimate fear? What's that? The unknown. How about death, right? The ultimate fear is the atomic bomb and death, and total death, right? Total annihilation. The Cold War, during the Cold War, we entered into this dynamic that's referred to as MAD, which is a great acronym, or mutually assured destruction. And basically the arms race that developed during the Cold War was basically that the United States and the Soviet Union tried to match each other in terms of their nuclear stockpile, so that if one side started the war, the other side would finish it, and everybody would be destroyed. And the rational thinking behind that was no one will ever do it, right? Because it would be mutually assured destruction. So really crazy thinking, and this fear of atomic weapons, and that sort of wrapped into a hot war is really what fueled the Red Scare. One of the things that, the other thing too is I put on the blog this morning. John Green has this great, series of Crash Course in World History and Crash Course in U.S. History. On the blog, and you can go directly to it if you want to, but on the blog I put embedded the video and put it under resources. There's it's maybe 12 minutes long, but it's the Cold War in U.S. history in 12 minutes, which is kind of brilliant. And so you can watch it there if you want to. The last part of it, he talks about the Red Scare and how it permeates society. So that's that. If you're interested in that, or you feel like you need more context for that, you can get some good information really quickly. The other thing, they mentioned McCarthyism, the other thing that comes out of the Red Scare is this, what's something known as McCarthyism, which is a reference to the Mccarthy Hearings. Senator Joseph McCarthy, who is from Wisconsin, if I remember correctly, basically goes on this campaign to try, it's kind of like the Inquisition in a sense, and he goes on this campaign to root out communists, which was very, kind of theatrical in nature. And that the hearings take place in 1954, and basically people were getting called into Congress and asked, are you a communist? Have you ever been a communist? And so on. Lots of people answered the questions and said, no, I'm not, and don't support it, and so on. And the other thing that happens in 1984 too is that the phrase "one nation under God" is added to the Pledge of Allegiance. That hasn't, and that surprises. How many of you knew that wasn't always a part? Yeah, there are lots of people today who didn't know that that wasn't how it was initially written. And what's that?
But our founding fathers.
Yeah, and the founding fathers had nothing to do. The Pledge of Allegiance, I think, was written in the late 19th century, and then it's during this time frame that that this is inserted into it. So there's this very intense dynamic that's kind of swirling around. The John Lawson is probably one of the best known of a group of individuals known as the Hollywood 10. There was this concern, again, that McCarthy was really kind of ramping up, was that Hollywood was producing films that were propagandistic and had, communist ideas, embedded within them. John Lawson was a part of a group known as the Hollywood 10, and they were people in the film industry who refused to answer questions at the hearing. They felt that it violated basically violated their civil rights. And some of them had been communists in the past or sympathetic, and Lawson was one of them in the 30s, which was a very different time than in the 1950s, post-World War II. And some of them weren't, but they took a stand. And I'll show you this. I thought I did I lose it? Or maybe it's there it is. Good. I thought I had it on the next one. And I'm going to jump out of here really quick and make sure the sound is up. Okay, because I had it down a few minutes ago. This is a very famous part of the excerpts, and I want to play it as just a minute or so because it gives you a sense of the tone of the time.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? The question of communism is in no way related to this inquiry, which is an attempt to get control of the screen and to invade the basic rights of Americans in all fields. The question here relates not only to the question of my membership in any political organization, but this committee is attempting to establish the right, which is historically denied to any committee of this sort. We're going to get the answer to that question we have to say every week. Are you a member of the Communist Party? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? It's unfortunate and tragic that I have to teach this committee the basic principles of Americanism. Question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? I'm framing my answer in the only way in which any American citizen can frame his answer. Then you deny it. Then you absolutely invade. Then you deny. You refuse to answer that question. That's correct. I told you the stand for the Bill of Rights. I'll take the big off.
Yeah, so the people booing are not booing him; they're booing the people running the hearings. McCarthy, actually, yeah. So, what's that? Yeah, he was, and dangerous too. What happened for a lot of people in Hollywood? They got blacklisted if they didn't answer properly or didn't answer at all, which meant that their careers were tanked. For Lawson, what he had hoped was, and what the Hollywood 10 had hoped was that it would go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would say that to be asked these questions did violate the Constitution or your constitutional rights. But what happened is that the Supreme Court refused to hear it, and Lawson spent a year in prison for this, which is really scary, I think. And this kind of fear was something that was really deeply embedded in the and it really changed the tone of what it means to be an American. And that's something that affects certainly our own time as well. So again, if you want a little more context for this time frame, that John Green quick video is a good source. The other work that Johns is doing about this time are a series of and they're kind of like combined paintings in a way. They're paintings, but also these shadowy figures and body parts that are cast out of plaster and then painted, and there are a series of paintings and targets. And you'll see when we watch the video that Johns, when he's speaking, is fairly, he doesn't give you a lot of information about the content, but and also keep in mind he's talking in the early 1970s, so the dynamic certainly has shifted. But even so, he tends to talk about the work very formally. But for people who study Johns' work and they think of it as work that's coming out of the context of this time, they think about these things about, well, what is a target, right? A target is something you shoot at. And then embedded, literally, a part of these images are body parts that make reference to, in that sense, we're making reference to the human body. So it's this, stylized idea of a target, but it's bringing in this idea of human beings as well. There are some scholars who also look at this work and interpret it as referencing Johns being gay as well. And one of the things, again, both Rauschenberg and Johns, I would say were gay, but Johns is actually still alive. Rauschenberg died a few years ago. They were actually in a relationship together for a long time and never ever publicly talked about it because they couldn't, and because they each would have lost their careers. So even in more recent years, Rauschenberg doesn't talk about Johns in this relationship. And so this is also one of the reasons why when scholars look at this work and they see the body parts and the faces kind of hidden behind the targets, they often interpret this as being kind of a veiled reference, to living within that kind of dynamic. But again, Johns has never really acknowledged this or never really talked about that as well. Also, show you these images here. Actually, let me show it to you with this image here, because Leo Castelli will be in the video segments that we'll watch too. Johns, around this time frame in the late 50s, was also casting objects and then painting them so that they looked like the original work, such as the painted bronze beer cans. I won't tell you the story behind this one because he tells it in the video, and it's kind of interesting. But it's the story's connected to Leo Castelli. Here's Castelli in his gallery. He's standing in front of a Frank Stella painting, the Johns's one of Johns's five paintings, Rauschenberg's bed painting, and in front of another work by Lee Montague, who's an artist working in this time frame as well. Castelli is the first gallery dealer who is really showing the work of these pop art group of artists in the 50s, Rauschenberg and Johns. And he's the first gallery dealer to get Johns' first significant show. And he really kind of brokers Johns' work selling. And Castelli is significant. The Castelli Gallery is still around today, even though Leo Castelli himself is no longer alive. It's considered one of the old blue chip galleries. And he's an artist a gallery owner in a lot of ways. He kind of took a chance on some of these artists, but he also realized what potential they have within the market as well. So having said that, we're going to switch over. Just again, there's kind of brief, kind of some visual background. We'll watch some segments from Painter's painting, and so we'll see. We'll see a short snippet first of Rauschenberg talking. The way this documentary is set up, the artists are almost always in their studios. So when you see Rauschenberg, and it's kind of funny, he's kind of sitting on top of a tall ladder with a glass in his hand that looks kind of like it's got whiskey or bourbon in it. He's in his studio, but it's kind of a strange shot. We'll watch that for a couple minutes, and then we'll shift to a different chapter, it'll begin with Johns talking, but Rauschenberg will also come back into play as well.
There seemed to be no time element, no period.
Sorry about that.
In painting for me. Like last summer I wasn't yet leaving. And there's early trips.
This is de Kooning talking, but it makes a really fast edit to Rauschenberg.
Christian Roman wall paintings, say, just threw me for a loop. And I thought, particularly with brush brushes. You know, I like painting with a brush.
The abstract expressionists and myself what they had in common was touch. I was never interested in their pessimism or editorializing. You have to have time to feel sorry for yourself if you're going to be a good abstract expressionist. And I think I always considered that a waste. But what we did, like what I did, that looks like abstract expressionism is that with their grief and art passion and action painting, they let the brushstroke show.
The idea that had come to me that I should have to mean what I did, then accompanying that was that there was no reason to mean what other people did. So if I could tell that I was doing what someone else was doing, then I would try not to do it. Because it seemed to me that de Kooning did his work perfectly beautifully, and there was no reason for me to help him with it.
Well, but everybody's influenced by everybody.
When we get to Warhol, we'll come back to this part of the interview. The Warhol interview that's in here is great. It's sort of classic Warhol evading all sorts of questions.
Things I wanted to try with an oil eraser drawing. And I did drawings myself and erased them, but that seemed like 50-50. And so then I knew that I had to pull back farther. And like, if it was going to be an all eraser drawing, it had to be art in the beginning.
That's strange. I have no idea.
And I went to Bill and told him about it and locked the door. And started with a portfolio of drawings. And then, no, not those. And then went to another portfolio, and he said, these are drawings I would miss. So he pulled out one, he put that back, and then he said, now I'm going to give you one really hard to erase. And he picked out another. And he was right. I spent, I think, nearly 3 weeks with no fewer than 15 different kinds of erasers. And that made it real. I mean, that wasn't, I wasn't just making a few marks and rubbing them out myself. I may have said that painting relates as much to life as it does to art, or vice versa, but I don't think so. I said that you couldn't make either. And you had to work in that hole between. What does that say? It's undefined. That makes the adventure of painting.
One of the key early pictures within the proto-pop movement, perhaps the most important of all, is rebus, which is a word that means puzzle. And in this single painting of Rauschenberg's, as early as 1954, there's a veritable anthology of the possibilities that are going to take over during the period that's coming up.
So I prepared the ground of the newspapers, but colored sections, which happen to be the funnies. So that I had an already going surface, so there wouldn't be a beginning to the picture. And so just all be additive. I mean, like it doesn't really matter what's inside. It's like when it stops, because you're dealing with an object, what it can make you think of how it could continue. You begin with the possibilities of the material, and then you let them do what they can do. So the artist is really almost a bystander while he's working. I mean, the hierarchy of material completely broken down.
In my first show of Rauschenberg's, there was a curious couple called Factum 1 and Factum 2.
I painted two identical pictures, but only identical to the limits of the eye, the hand, the material, adjusting to the differences from one to another. Neither one of them was painted first.
He wanted to show that nothing was really casual. Even the slashes, the brush strokes, the drips were calculated. And curiously enough, it was in defense of a movement that he moved away from. It was in defense of abstract expressionism.
My idea wasn't that I wasn't involved in chance as much as I was that I felt isolated. I wasn't interested in attaining a precious state of isolation. I was interested in what was around me. Art doesn't come out of art. I mean, you don't work with one foot in the art book. And no painter has ever really been able to help another. And I had no interest in being better or worse than any other artist. I mean, I had enough self-respect to know that somehow we were different, and my work, when it functions, celebrates that. My paintings are invitations to look somewhere else. And they have been for a long time. Like the new piece is like how not to throw your newspaper away. Because that's where it is. And if you are conscientious at all, information there in one newspaper, no matter where you pick it up, blow your head. If you pay $15,000 for something, you're not going to wrap the garbage in it, right? I don't know who buys newspapers, but I know how they don't read them and take them seriously. And it's the best book in the world.
We might have one last thing on that. Shortly thereafter, Jasper Johns appeared. Was an modest, shy young man. And And I was so curious to see what his painting looked like that I thought, well, could we interrupt looking at his paintings and go down and see what Jasper's paintings look like? So he, how Rob always was, generous and friendly, and he said, of course, let's go down and see Jasper's paintings first. And so down we went.
It had been my intention to be an artist since I was a child. And in the place where I was a child, there were no artists, and there was no art, so I really didn't know what that meant. And I think it meant that I would be able to be in a situation other than the one that I was in. I think that was primarily. Whereas the society there seemed to accommodate every other thing I knew about, but not that possibility. So I think that in part the idea of being an artist was not kind of fantasy, but being out of this. Then, because there's none of this here, so if you're going to be, you have to be somewhere else. So I like that, and plus I like to do things with my hands. So I deliberately then tried to set up a new frame of mind for myself. Now, whether that's how deliberately one can do that, I don't know. I mean, it may just be that the thought occurs at the same time that you're ready to do this. I don't know. So I worked in various ways and destroyed various things. Became perhaps too serious about what I did. And then the paintings that you were talking about start with the flag painting, and that is sometimes scorned the truth, which is that one night I dreamed I painted a large American flag, and the next morning I got up and I went out and bought materials to begin it.
What's a collage material made out of?
Paper and wax, newspaper, any kind of paper.
I mean, what's the order of application?
In that painting, it would be hard to describe. It would be very hard to describe, because some things I stitched onto the canvas with thread. I don't know what the canvas was. I think it was a sheet. And things were sewn on, and it's very rotten painting because I began it in house enamel paint. And it wouldn't dry quick enough. And then I had in my head this idea of something I had heard, I don't know what, about wax encaustic. And I changed in the middle of the painting to that, because the encaustic just has to cool. And then it's hard and you don't blur it again. Whereas the enamel, you have to wait 8 hours or something for it to do that. You have to wait 8 hours before you do that. Whereas with the encaustic, you can just keep on.
In a sense, as it decides the opposite on the trip and all that, isn't it?
Well, the trip so far starts, like each discrete movement remains discrete. Say within an area of red, you could still divide that into something else. You could see a drip of something, or a font, or a piece of paper, or whatever, even though it was all red. Then I thought, well, what difference does the color make then? If what you're doing is not looking at the color, but looking at these other things. The combination of this new material and this, for me, new image or new idea about imagery made things very lively for me at that time, and started my mind working and my arm.
I always felt there was a connection between the American flag and the fact from the South.
Well, my Aunt Gladys once, when she read the thing in the magazine, wrote me a letter saying she was so proud of me because she had worked so hard to instill some respect for the American flag in his students. And she was so glad the mark had been left on me. I'm thinking about the imagery of the flag and what was trying to say what it was like, then I thought of the target. Then I don't know why I had this idea, but I had this idea that I would have the target with these wooden blocks above. I was concerned with the approach and distance and contact with things. So I had the idea that these blocks could be movable, and they could be attached to something behind the target that would make noise, so that each one would make a different sound. That was the way it started. Then I didn't like the idea. I don't know why. It was too difficult. I don't remember. But at any rate, my studio had in it various plaster casts that I had done from people, like hands and feet and faces and things. So I simply thought of these wooden sections, instead of moving back and forth and activating sounds, as being able to lift up and see something rather than hear something. And then I saw these things I had, and I decided to put them in here. So I did.
What about Dada, Neil Dada, and Duchamp, with whom you've already been allied?
What about Dada? What kind of question is that? What about Dada?
When Duchamp made his cage of marble cubes that looked just like sugar lumps, representing or fashioning what could easily be duplicated, and fashioning it in a traditionally artistic material like marble, and making marble look like an industrial product like sugar cubes. Johns followed him by casting a flashlight or a beer can in bronze, and then painting them, in some cases, to look identical, or a coffee can filled with paintbrushes. Casting it in bronze and then carefully painting it so you couldn't tell the difference between the bronze version and the real version. Well, the point of all that is supposed to be the point.
I think all work has relationship to other work. I think an idea around what you're talking about is the possibility that I deliberately behaved in a Dada fashion in my work, which is not true. Because I didn't know anything about Dada at that time, and I only learned about Dada by. Actually, I didn't even know the term, I must confess I didn't, and Bob Rauschenberg did. And when someone said that, he explained to me what Dada was, and I thought, well, I should find out firsthand what it was. So Bob and I went down to the Orangeburg collection in Philadelphia to look at primarily the Duchamps. And I didn't know Duchamp's work, though Bob did, to some extent. And I found it very interesting. And over the years, I found it more and more interesting. And any I don't know what to say. I'm not embarrassed by any relationship that anyone can make between my work and myself. My work is not imitative of his, and I'm entirely sympathetic to everything that he's ever done, I believe. But not in any, I don't think there's any stylistic similarity. And the Dadaists were Dadaists by they were Dadaists by saying they were Dadaists. If I'm Dadaist, it was. I'm certainly not.
The collectors have made an enormous contribution, not only to the market, but to painters themselves. It seems to me that the fact of the skulls, the fact of Dr. Lucas, these people that buy, that set standards, make everyone else itch to emulate. The itch to emulate, the desire for status, is certainly one of the main things in our society.
My first great purchase after the abstract expressionist was to buy out almost completely the 1958 show of Jasper Johns. He did very poorly in that show, and I couldn't understand why it wasn't selling. I thought it was so marvelous, because he was using the technique of abstract expressionism, but he was the hatchet man who really was the moment that abstract expressionism started to, come to the realization that something new was happening. I told Castelli I wanted to buy the whole show, and he said to me, no, you should, that's very vulgar. He says, we can't do that. So I bought about 8 things.
Prices of Jasper have gone up in a fantastic way. The Hollywood plaster cast, for instance, that was in my first show I bought personally. The price was $1,200. The flag was the most expensive painting in the show, and it was $2,000. Now these 2 paintings would be, I think, $150,000 and $200,000 respectively.
I heard that Bill DeConing said about Leo, with whom he was annoyed over something. That son of a bitch, you could give him 2 beer cans and he could sell them. And at that time, I had made a couple of sculptures. I made 1 or 2 of a flashlight and 1 or 2 of a light bulb. Little small objects, small sort of ordinary objects. And when I heard this story, I thought, what a fantastic sculpture for me. I mean, really, just absolutely perfect. So I made this work. I did it, and
Frankly, I think that, this accusation that's leveled against the dealers that they are responsible for shaping the art market is a very silly one. Naturally, we are there to do that job, and we are doing it. Now, if people, ourselves, and the critics, and the museums go along with us, then there is a consensus there, and therefore we are right and not wrong. So I think that what we are doing is merely doing our job.
I want to know if artists have any chance of being up there where the decisions are made instead of having to go through you to the Rockefellers from now on. You know, Sarkar, that you had to go through the brothers Rockefeller in order to get your job. You know, that's where the authority comes from. You know, that's where you have to go for any authority that you get in the future. I want to know if we're really going to be up there, in whatever role you want to call it, where the policies are made, whether we have to go through this indirect roundabout.
I'd say the chances are probably pretty slim.
I became aware of the fact that collecting is just not going to a gallery and buying a painting. Suddenly I became very deeply involved with artists who later were to make up the group of pop artists, but they didn't even know each other. We had parties up here and dinners up here where a lot of these pop artists met each other, and my purchase of their pictures seemed to be crucial to the development. You know what happens to a young artist when you buy a painting is he looks at you like you're completely mad, and then suddenly he starts painting like a maniac.
The skulls in their front hall have a double portrait of themselves by George Siegel. I remember Ethel pulling me before she went out to Siegel's to the farm to be cast, wondering whether she'd wear a real courage or a copy, because it was going to be destroyed during the casting process. And I think she wore a copy. She didn't see the point in destroying a real courage outfit.
I don't believe in anything but my own intuition. And so when I met Olenberg, I started to buy, and then I heard someone mention to me about a fellow called Andy Warhol. I went to see him in 61, early in 61, and he said to me, I want to sell you some paintings. And I said, well, what do you mean some paintings? He says, well, he said, I don't care how many you take, but I need $1,400.
We'll pause there. I know, right? We'll need some context for Warhol, especially with this interview, or the segment of the interview. Lots of stuff in here. Packed in here. We've got a few minutes. Thoughts, comments, questions. Did you understand that was Greenberg talking? No? Because he was the one person who wasn't at there.
Well, I thought it was interesting, Rauschenberg said that art doesn't come out of art, and then the rest of the time they talked about the art that came out of different art movements. Like, how would you say something like that?
Yeah, I know, it's conflicted, right? One of the things to keep in mind, I think, too, is that as they're talking, I kind of noticed it, but you notice that they don't talk about the content and the meaning too much. They're speaking about their art in a really formal way. And something to consider is that none of these artists have gone through MFA programs. MFA programs are developing in the 1960s, and so their work, they're seen, a good 10 years or more before that. One of the things that MFA programs do, whether it's, I don't know that you can say it's for good or bad, it's just different. But one of the things that MFA programs do is they force you to make, they force you to make work, and not just make the work, but talk about it, put it into context, do research, understand everything possible, about what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it, not so much how you're doing it. And then be able to articulate it, to talk about it, to write about it. So artists, that have been, artists since that time frame tend to be much more articulate in terms of being able to, not always certainly, but as a whole, tend to be more articulate than artists before this time period. Which is not to say that there aren't artists who are very articulate before that, but that's one of the ways that the MFA program has affected the professionalization of being an artist. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because, when I was watching it and Jasper Johns was talking about why he used the plaster molds in the target piece, he's like, I just liked them.
Yeah.
If we said that in a critique today, somebody would be like, what?
Yeah, you would get in trouble, right? You wouldn't make it through an MFA program if you just said they were in the studio and I liked them, so I put them in there. That just wouldn't fly. Yeah, Was there a hand up somewhere?
I actually did that once in a painting class as an experiment.
Yeah, to see what would happen.
I just thought it would look cool, and they were just like.
Yeah, and that's because that has to do with the professionalization of being an artist since the '60s with the MFA program. Because you have, even if that's exactly what you do in the moment, I like it. I'm going to put it in there. I'm going to see what happens. Looks cool. What you have to be able to do is afterwards make sense out of it and be able to articulate it. So and the reality is, people do that. They experiment and try something. You got to get feeling about something.
In the end, it's always there's a reason why you did that, whether you know it at the time or not. It's something about whatever you did, and it drew you to it.
Right, and that's why the analysis is important, because there's generally nothing really wrong with working. What's the word I'm looking for? With working intuitively. Thank you. I totally lost the word. Working intuitively, as long as you eventually understand what it is that you're doing, and the more that you do that, the more that you're self-critical and self-analytical, the better you will be at being intuitive in this way. One thing, one more minute, we'll come back and talk more about this on Monday. On Monday, we'll shift toward Lichtenstein and Warhol, and spend probably a little more time with Warhol than Lichtenstein. We'll look at some snippets of the interview with Warhol here, and it does require, I think, to really understand Warhol in this context, because he comes across as very flippant and a little bizarre, but there is a method to his madness, believe it or not. But one of the things that we've seen in this segment, too, is the importance of the collectors. Philip Johnson is he also has died just recently, is a very well-known architect, really significant architect in his own respect, but also a huge collector of art as well. A lot of his work has gone into public collections today. So you've got Johnson talking about being a collector, and then Robert and Ethel Skoll are talking about collecting. And I hope what you take away from his discussion is how important collectors are to people who are buying artwork are to the development of artists' careers. And one of the things that happens in the 50s, and especially through the 1960s, and when Warhol would begin to transition into the 60s, the art market really starts to get hot. And people. One of the things that I always admire about the Skolls is they bought a lot of artwork, but they seemed to really love it. They lived with it and really seemed to enjoy it. One of the things that will happen from the 60s forward is people start buying artwork in terms of investment. And you get a sense of that with Pistelli. I mean, he talks about, hey, I got these work for, they were a few $1,000s, and now they're worth, I don't know what it says, $100,000 or $30,000, something like that. The works he's talking about now pretty much probably won't ever go on the market because they're in major collections of Johns' work, but if they were to go on the market, they would be millions of dollars. Just the prices have gone up and appreciated exponentially. So I'll leave you with those thoughts.